Chapter 3 1. Clark Kent arrived at Star Labs, the scene of the explosion, with a speed that defied logic. As he took in the devastation, he sprinted towards the disaster, a stark contrast to the crowds fleeing in the opposite direction. Only minutes had passed since the blast, and the area was already a tableau of destruction and chaos. The air was thick with dust, blurring his vision and coating everything and everyone in a fine, gray layer. Alarms from the damaged building wailed incessantly, adding to the cacophony of the disaster. As Clark Kent stepped into the chaotic aftermath, his intentions to help were immediately challenged by the overwhelming scenes around him. He noticed a scientist, her lab coat torn and bloodied, stumbling out of the debris and calling for her colleagues. Just as he moved towards her, an elderly man with a bleeding head wound caught his eye, wandering aimlessly amidst the rubble, looking lost and disoriented. Clark's instinct to assist was diverted yet again, as his attention was drawn to a man trapped under a heavy beam, his face contorted in agony. Before Clark could reach him, the heart-wrenching cries of a child in the arms of a shocked mother on the curb redirected his steps. The mother sat in a daze, clutching her child, both covered in dust. As he approached to offer comfort, the sight of a lab technician frantically scrambling amidst the rubble, desperately trying to shut down an exposed, sparking electrical panel, preventing any further electrical hazards in the wreckage. Before he could decide what to do, an unconscious jogger lying motionless on the ground demanded his immediate attention. Clark's resolve to help was tested at every turn. The magnitude of the disaster unfolding before him was staggering. A businessman trying to make a phone call, a young couple frozen in shock, a dazed tourist sitting on the ground, and a limping security guard. Each situation seemed as urgent as the last. Clark found himself caught in a maelstrom of need, his desire to assist clashing with the relentless barrage of crises, each demanding his attention and leaving him grappling with where to begin in this whirlwind of urgency and despair. The smell of chemicals hung heavy in the air, mingling with the charred scent of destruction. Debris littered the ground, papers fluttered down from the gaping maw of the building, and random objects from the lab lay scattered amidst the rubble. As Clark approached Star Labs, he saw the extent of the devastation. The side of the building was sheared away as if by a giant's hand, leaving a gaping void where offices and labs had once stood. A massive crater marred the ground at the epicenter of the explosion, a testament to the force of the blast. Beside the crater, a significant portion of the facility was in the process of collapsing. The outer sections of the building folded down in a slow, agonizing descent, while further in, floors had pancaked onto each other. Enormous concrete slabs leaned at dangerous angles, threatening to come crashing down. The scene was one of apocalyptic ruin, and in the midst of it all stood Clark, the only person moving towards the heart of the devastation, driven by a sense of purpose and determination. As the chaos unfolded around him, Clark swiftly began documenting the scene with his cell phone, knowing the importance of capturing these first moments. He snapped photos of the crumbling Star Labs building, its side torn away, revealing a gaping void where bustling labs and offices once stood. He captured the immense crater at the explosion's epicenter, a stark testament to the blast's ferocity. His lens then moved to the surrounding structures, many of which had sustained significant damage, their windows shattered, facades cracked. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder as first responders began to arrive, cutting through the mayhem with urgency. They immediately started triage, attending to the injured, their swift actions a glimmer of order amidst the overwhelming devastation. Clark spotted a delirious woman sitting on a curb, her disorientation evident in her vacant stare. A Star Labs ID badge dangled from her blouse, identifying her as part of the catastrophe's epicenter. Kneeling beside her, Clark asked gently, "Are you okay, ma'am?" There was no response, just a blank stare that seemed to look through him. He examined her more closely, noting that she appeared to have only superficial injuries. "Ma'am, do you feel hurt anywhere?" He tried again, but still there was no reply. Desperate to make a connection, he asked, "Were you in that building when it happened?" At this, her blank gaze broke momentarily. I stepped out for a smoke," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, a hideous creaking sound filled the air, a groan of concrete grinding against concrete. Clark's head snapped up just in time to see another massive chunk of the building's structure give way, crashing down with a thunderous roar. Clark's focus was abruptly diverted from the woman, as he heard a desperate voice near the edge of the crater. A man was frantically calling out for assistance. Clark quickly made his way over to him. "He's trapped under the debris," the man pointed out, his voice strained with urgency. Clark's eyes followed to where he was pointing, and he saw a horrific sight. A massive steel beam had pinned another man's legs. The victim was clearly in agony, his face contorted in pain. "I can't lift it," the first man said, his voice laced with panic. "Help me, please." "What's your name?" Clark asked, trying to keep him focused. "Devon," the man replied, his eyes never leaving his trapped companion. "There's no way you can lift that, Devon," Clark said, assessing the situation. He quickly scanned the area and spotted a long piece of rebar. He grabbed it, wedging it under the steel beam. "Here," Clark instructed. "Use this as a lever, and I'll try to lift." As Devon put all his weight on the bar, Clark positioned himself to lift the beam. With his extraordinary strength, he easily lifted the heavy metal, feigning effort to avoid suspicion. With a pretend grunt, he pushed the beam away, ensuring it landed clear of the injured man. "Go! Get him help!" Clark directed Devon towards the paramedics. He watched as Devon, with a look of relief and gratitude, hurried to get assistance. Clark knew that every second counted in saving the injured man's life. As Clark turned from the scene of the rescue, a first responder approached him swiftly. "You're going to need to evacuate," the firefighter said. "This way, sir," his tone firm and authoritative. "I'm a journalist," Clark responded, attempting to assert his right to stay and document the events. "I don't care who you are," the firefighter said, unswayed. "It's not safe here." His expression was stern, underlining the gravity of the situation and leaving no room for negotiation. The urgency in his voice and the chaotic backdrop of the disaster site reinforced his words, making it clear that the priority was safety, not coverage. Two. For Emil Hamilton, panic was more than an emotion. It was a physical realm in which he found himself helplessly trapped. The panic enveloped him completely, a thick, suffocating blanket that clouded his senses and judgment. He was adrift in it, lost in a sea of fear and confusion. Around him, the darkness felt almost physical, a crushing presence that weighed heavily on his chest. In the distance, a searing, sharp pain in his left arm served as a brutal anchor to reality. It was a screaming, agonizing pain, yet it was the panic that dominated, holding him in its relentless grip. Emil knew he should be moving, scrambling, clawing his way out of this abyss. Yet his body refused to cooperate, denied him the ability to act. He was paralyzed, not by the debris, but by the overwhelming terror that gripped him. But then, that pain in his arm. It was a beacon in the darkness. Mentally, he began to focus on it, crawling towards it in his mind as a way to anchor himself. Slowly, the realization dawned on him. He was awake, conscious. Yet there was no light to be seen, just an oppressive blackness enveloping him. How had he ended up here? His head spun, his ears rang with a persistent muffled sound. The last moments before the darkness were a blur, fragments of memory that he struggled to piece together amidst the chaos of his current predicament. In the suffocating blackness, a glimmer of light pierced the darkness. The soft yet brilliant glow of a cell phone screen. It was a dazzling beacon in the enveloping shadow, a small yet significant sign of hope. Emil wasn't alone. Faint voices, murmurs, and sobs filled the air, a chorus of shared fear and survival. The light emanated from the phone of a student, the young woman with striking green hair. Her face, illuminated by the screen in the pitch black, appeared ghostly yet comforting. Around her, other faces began to emerge from the darkness, drawn to the light like moths to a flame. Emil's memories of the disaster came flooding back with overwhelming clarity. The erratic arcs of energy, the massive shockwave, the disintegration of the reactor tower. and the ultimate collapse of the building. The realization that he was trapped beneath tons of concrete and steel crashed over him, bringing with it a wave of claustrophobia. The walls felt closer, the air heavier, the weight of the rubble above him more oppressive. He fought to suppress the rising panic, knowing that succumbing to it would help no one. "No time for that now," he whispered to himself, a mantra to keep the fear at bay. Around him, the soft glow of the cell phone served as a fragile thread of connection, a reminder that they were not alone in this dark, crushing tomb. Emile strained to take stock of their harrowing surroundings, illuminated only by the weak but vital light of the cell phone. They were confined in a space barely 3 or 4 feet high, a suffocating pocket formed by the fallen structure. Above and around them, the remnants of the atrium loomed menacingly, a jagged landscape of destruction. Concrete rubble lay strewn in chaotic heaps, some pieces as large as small cars, others reduced to gravel and dust. Dangerously sharp edges of crushed concrete jutted out at odd angles, creating a treacherous terrain. Amongst the debris, twisted and mangled pieces of rebar protruded, their once straight lines now contorted into grotesque shapes. They seemed to dance eerily in the deep shadows cast by the cell phone's light, moving as if alive with each subtle tremor of the unstable wreckage. The air was thick with dust, making each breath a laborious effort, and the smell of ruptured chemicals and smoldering materials hung heavily around them. In this constrained, shadowy world, the absence of a clear exit was palpable, adding to the sense of entrapment. Every direction Emile looked seemed to lead only to more heaps of wreckage, a labyrinth of destruction with no discernible way out. The light from the cell phone, though a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness, only served to emphasize the immense scale of their entombment under the once majestic Star Labs atrium. "I have no signal. I can't get 911, the young woman with green hair said, her voice tinged with panic, breaking the heavy silence. Emile, ignoring the searing pain in his arm, crawled over to her. "There's too much concrete above us," he said, his voice low. "Signals can't get through." "We have to let them know we're here," she insisted, her eyes scanning the cramped space for any solution. Just then, an ominous groan echoed through their confined space, the sound of shifting concrete sending a wave of fear through the group. The rubble around them creaked and groaned, a stark reminder of their precarious situation under the collapsed building. Emile and the others froze, holding their breath, as the reality of their vulnerability settled in. In the dim light, Emile could make out the pale shapes of other students, their faces ghostly in the darkness as they watched him and the young woman with apprehension. "Try to gather everyone together," Emile instructed, his voice steady despite the pain. "Take a roll call. We need to find out if anyone is missing or seriously injured." The young woman nodded, then her gaze fell on Emile's arm. "Your arm," she pointed out, her voice laced with concern. There, a long, thin shard of glass protruded, razor-sharp and embedded in his flesh. Emile groaned at the sight, the pain intensifying with his awareness of the injury. He pushed the discomfort to the back of his mind. Focus on getting out, he silently urged himself, knowing that their survival depended on staying calm and organized in the face of their dire situation. "Go," Emile urged the young woman, his voice firm. "But don't touch anything, and don't move any of the concrete. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down on us." Her eyes, wide with concern, met his. "What are you going to do?" Emile gestured towards the back of their confined space. "There should be a door back here," he explained. "I'm going to see if I can find and activate the emergency release. It might be our way out." Nodding, the young woman turned to the others, her movements cautious as she began the task Emile had given her. Meanwhile, Emile, despite the throbbing pain in his arm, started to carefully make his way towards where he remembered the door being. Each step was measured, mindful of the unstable debris around them, and the rising temperature that added an invisible yet palpable layer of threat to their already perilous situation. Three. In the aftermath of the devastating explosion, Clark found himself at the epicenter of chaos and uncertainty. His reporter's instincts kicked in, driving him to capture the immediate aftermath. Within minutes, He had crafted and published an article to an independent website, swiftly posting it to social media alongside the initial photos he had taken at the scene. The images, raw and powerful, spoke volumes of the tragedy that had unfolded. Moving through the disarray with purpose, Clark began gathering more information. He conducted interviews with witnesses, their voices tremulous with shock, each account adding another piece to the jigsaw of events. Realizing the need for expert insight, he made a call to Metropolis University, seeking the knowledge of someone in their physics department. Their conversation shed light on the possible causes of the explosion, weaving scientific reasoning into the narrative. Amidst his inquiries, Clark spoke with law enforcement personnel. Their updates were concise, filled with the urgency of the situation. Rumors circulated that there were still people trapped in the building, adding a palpable tension to the atmosphere. Each piece of information he gathered was a thread in the larger tapestry of the story he was piecing together. With about 30 minutes to go before the lead incident coordinator's press conference, which was scheduled to occur approximately 2 hours after the explosion, Clark took a brief pause. He stepped away from the turmoil, finding a quieter spot to make an important personal call. He dialed his parents, wanting to update them on the situation and reassure them of his safety. Clark's call connected, and he immediately heard his mother's voice amplified through her speakerphone, his dad present in the background. "Oh, Clark, we saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Ma," Clark responded, his voice carrying a blend of reassurance and weariness. "We saw your photos, son. You're right in the middle of it all?" His father's voice came through, tinged with a mix of pride and concern. "I got here fast," Clark reflected, his thoughts drifting back to the moment he arrived at the chaotic scene. "I was the first to arrive. It was awful." He hoped he was hiding the tremor in his voice. "Are you being careful, son?" his father asked, the question layered with unspoken meaning. Clark understood the deeper implication of his father's words. He wasn't just asking about his safety as a reporter. There was the ever-present concern about the other part of his life, the part that they had been so careful to keep secret. "Yes, Pa. I've been cautious," he assured, his voice now more steady. In the back of his mind, amidst the concern and love evident in his parents' voices, Clark couldn't help but think about the trapped people at the explosion site. He worried that he wasn't doing enough to help. He had capabilities that could make a real difference. The challenge was in ensuring he could help without revealing the secrets that he and his parents had guarded for so long. "I'm not so sure it's a great idea for you to be there," Ma said with a note of apprehension. "Right in the middle of all that attention, so many cameras, so many people watching." "Ma, if I'm going to take my reporting seriously, then I'm going to be in a lot of situations like this," Clark replied, his voice firm yet understanding. Through the phone line he could hear her sigh, a sound that spoke volumes of her concern and love for him. In the ensuing silence, his father, ever perceptive, sensed there was something more weighing on Clark's mind. "What else? What's on your mind, son?" Pa asked. Clark hesitated, then spoke. "There are people trapped under there. 20 of them. Most of them students who were on a field trip to the lab." "Clark," Pa began, his voice imbued with a mix of warning and deep concern. Clark knew what his father was implying, the unspoken fears of what would happen if people knew the truth about where Clark had come from. "The first responders know they're in there somewhere, but they don't know how to get to them. But, well, I can actually see them," Clark said, his voice a mix of determination and unease. "You can't get involved, son," Ma interjected. "We talked about this," Pa added. "I know." Clark's voice conveyed his internal struggle. "But it's like the retirement home, Pa. I don't think I can just sit here and do nothing." "You're reporting on it," Ma pointed out. "You know what I mean," Clark said. "People will see you, son," Pa warned, his tone underscored with concern. Clark wrestled with the dilemma, the reporter in him documenting the unfolding tragedy, while the other part, the part that had always been set apart since he was a boy, yearned to intervene directly. It was a tug-of-war between the responsibility he felt towards those in peril and the need to protect the secret that had defined much of his life. As Clark conversed with his parents, His attention momentarily shifted to a group of weary firefighters. They were shrugging out of their heavy gear, exhaustion etched on their faces, as a fresh shift prepared to take over the daunting task ahead. "You're right, they will see me. But I have a plan for that," Clark said, his voice carrying a new resolve. Clark's mind was racing as he considered his options. "The lead incident coordinator is giving a press conference in a few minutes," he told them. "I want to hear what they have to say. Then I'll decide." In his mind's eye, he could picture his parents back home, sitting at their worn kitchen table, exchanging worried glances and holding hands in silent support. He understood their fears all too well. They wanted nothing more than for him to be safe, to lead a normal life away from danger. Yet, they also understood the depth of his compassion. Pa's voice broke through his thoughts, steady and reassuring. "Son, we trust you. Whatever you decide, we know you'll do the right thing." As Clark ended the call, his mind wandered back to a distant night in Smallville, Kansas. It might have been the first time he experienced the complex blend of emotions that were currently swirling within him. 4. 10 years earlier. The Kent pickup truck hummed down the dirt road, its passage undisturbed except for the soft crunch of tires on the snow-dusted path. The snow outside, now a gentle flurry, transformed the Kansas landscape into a picturesque holiday scene, with each flake adding to the quiet enchantment of the night. Inside the truck, the warmth went beyond the heater's embrace. It was the warmth of a family together, cocooned in shared laughter and memories. Pa was at the wheel, his hands steady and confident as he navigated the truck with practiced ease. The soft glow from the dashboard illuminated his contented expression, a silent testament to the pleasant evening they had just left behind. In the passenger seat, Ma leaned back, a soft smile playing on her lips as she listened to Clark, who was animatedly recounting the evening's events from the back seat. "You guys, you should have seen it," Clark said, his voice bubbling with mirth. "Ben's dog, that sneaky rascal, just snatched the turkey leg right off the table. And Ben... Oh, you should have seen him chasing after that dog in the snow." Pa chuckled, his eyes remaining on the road, but his mind picturing the scene. "I bet Ben never moved that fast before, not even when his prized cow wandered off last spring." Ma laughed, her eyes twinkling in the dim light. "And Mrs. Hubbard, she was about to set the world record for the longest gasp. I thought she'd never catch her breath." Clark leaned forward, his eyes alight with the joy of the memory. And the dog looked so pleased, like he'd planned it all along. A mastermind in a fur coat. The conversation flowed easily, the truck's cabin filled with laughter and the warmth of family. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake a silent witness to the simplicity and beauty of a winter's night in rural Kansas. The Kent family, cocooned in their world of joy and shared memories, continued their journey home, the truck's headlights carving a path through the snow, a beacon of light in the serene darkness. Outside, the world was transforming under the weight of the heavy snowfall. The wind, whistling through the bare branches of the trees, added a haunting soundtrack to the otherwise serene Kansas night. Inside the Kent's pickup truck, however, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Laughter and warmth filled the air, fogging up the windows and creating a cozy atmosphere, shielding them from the harsh winter outside. "That's strange," Ma said suddenly, her voice cutting through the merriment. She pointed towards the window, her brow furrowed in concern. "Do you see some kind of a glow over there above the tree line?" Pa turned his head, following Ma's gaze. "I think you're right," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. The snow was now coming down in thick sheets, each flake a white blur against the night sky, steadily reducing their visibility. Clark leaned forward in his seat, his eyes searching the direction Ma had pointed. They were right. Amidst the veil of the falling snow, a bloom of light glowed, unnatural and out of place. He squinted, trying to focus through the flurry. As his eyes adjusted, the scene beyond the trees came into sharp relief, as if the distance had suddenly collapsed. For a moment, Clark couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. Then, in a chilling rush of understanding, it hit him. It was the retirement home, but not the quiet, peaceful building he remembered. It was engulfed in flames, massive and wild, shooting up into the night sky, painting it an angry orange. Even through the thickening snow and the darkness of the night, he could see black smoke billowing, an ominous cloud against the winter sky. Shadowy figures were running out the door, their movements frantic and disjointed in the chaotic light of the fire. "Pa," Clark said, urgency in his voice. "It's Maplewood Retirement Home. It's on fire. It's really bad." Slowing the truck, Pa glanced in the rearview mirror at Clark. "You can see it, son?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and disbelief. "We're a mile away." He peered through the windshield, but the heavy snow and darkness obscured his view, a stark contrast to Clark's clear sight of the disaster unfolding. "Yes," Clark insisted, his voice rising with anxiety. "I don't see anyone there to help." "Jonathan," Ma said softly, her voice heavy with worry. "All those people." Clark thought of the residents, many of whom they knew personally. Without a word, Pa pressed the accelerator, his decision made. The truck took the turn onto the next dirt road, tires crunching over the snow-packed ground. The vehicle picked up speed, racing against time and the elements. The festive air that had filled the truck just moments ago had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the engine and the occasional blast of wind against the windows. The Kent's pickup truck navigated onto the blacktop, only to be greeted by a treacherous layer of freshly frozen ice. The truck began to skid, but Pa expertly steered into the skid, regaining control. As they approached the end of the long, winding driveway that led to Maplewood Retirement Home, the scene that unfolded before them was one of chaos and desperation. They all saw the fire trucks at the same time, a stark symbol of thwarted rescue efforts. One truck lay askew, having hit a patch of ice and lost control. The second truck, in a failed attempt to avoid a collision, was also immobilized. Both vehicles were stranded, helpless in the snow. "Oh, Jonathan!" Ma gasped, her voice strained with concern as Pa brought the pickup to a halt at the edge of the driveway. The way forward was blocked by the fire trucks, leaving them no closer to the retirement home itself. Outside, firefighters were frantically unloading their equipment, battling against the relentless wind and snow as they made their way on foot towards the blazing building. Clark shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on the retirement home as it was devoured by the merciless flames. To any other observer, the scene was one of uncontrollable chaos, but Clark possessed a gift that set him apart. As he concentrated, the world around him seemed to change. The smoke, the fiery tongues licking the walls, even the solid barriers of the building itself, began to fade from his view. His eyes, usually the carefree eyes of a teenager, now reflected a depth and intensity beyond his years. He looked harder, his unique vision piercing through the layers of reality that bound others. The walls of the retirement home became transparent under his gaze, revealing the frightened souls within. Clark could see them clearly now. People, some he recognized, others strangers, yet all united in their fear and desperation. They were trapped, scattered throughout the building, their faces distorted by fear and confusion. Some were huddled together, seeking comfort in their shared plight, while others were alone, their isolation magnified by the surrounding terror. A sense of urgency gripped Clark. These were not just faces. They were lives, each with a story, a family, hopes, and fears. He could see an elderly couple clutching each other in a smoke-filled room, a nurse trying to usher a group of residents toward a blocked exit, a solitary figure slumped against a wall, overcome by smoke. "There are still people coming out of the doors," Ma said, her voice tinged with horror as she watched the scene unfold from a distance. "What if there are people still in there?" "There are," Clark replied, his tone grave. "A lot of people." He turned his gaze back to his parents, locking eyes with Pa. "What are the firefighters going to do without their trucks?" Pa shook his head, the reality of the situation settling in. No way they can put out the fire without the trucks. It's impossible. "Pa," Clark said, his voice carrying a weight that was new, filled with a resolve that hinted at something beyond his years. Ma looked at Clark, sensing the change in his tone. "No," she whispered, a dawning realization mixed with fear in her eyes. Meeting her gaze, Clark's expression was resolute. "I can help them," he declared. "Oh, son," Ma said, her voice a mixture of awe and apprehension. Clark's eyes didn't waver. "I know what we've talked about, but I can get to them. I can get them out." Clark's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, his mind racing with the urgency of the situation. He pulled the door open and stepped out into the frigid night, the cold air biting at his skin. He felt torn, the weight of responsibility heavy on his young shoulders, knowing that every second they delayed could mean the difference between life and death. Behind him, the sound of the other door opening and closing signaled his father's exit from the truck. Clark felt his father's presence, a solid, comforting force, standing beside him in the snow-laden darkness. "I can't just do nothing, Pa," Clark said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the determination of a resolve much older than his years. "I know," Pa replied, his voice steady but laden with concern. "We'll go in together." Five. Clark and Pa, each with a determined stride, jogged up to the Maplewood retirement home. The blaze, like a monstrous creature from a nightmare, had completely engulfed the main entrance, turning it into a raging inferno. It was immediately apparent that entering through the front would be impossible. As they approached, the heat was almost tangible, a wall of scorching air that pushed against them with an almost physical force. Clark stole a glance at his father, noting the way Pa raised his arm, shielding his face from the heat. For a moment, Clark saw a flicker of hesitation in his father's eyes, a silent question of the decision to plunge into this hellish landscape. Nearby, firefighters huddled at a side entrance, their figures obscured by the thick, churning black smoke billowing out from the doorway. It was a futile attempt. The smoke was like a dense curtain, impenetrable and disorienting. Amidst the chaos, snippets of the firefighters' conversation floated over. Partial ceiling collapse at the front, probably started with the Christmas tree. How many still unaccounted for? Each word added weight to the growing dread in Clark's stomach. Respecting the firefighters' efforts, Clark and Pa moved further along the building's perimeter, searching for another entry point. The building's exterior, once familiar and welcoming, was now a contorted facade of flame and smoke. "Clark, what do you see?" Pa's voice, laced with urgency, pulled Clark's focus. "There's a hallway just beyond this wall," Clark said, pointing. "It's clearer than the rest, but there are people, trapped further in." Clark's gaze, fixed upon the burning retirement home, began to alter his perception of the world around him. He concentrated, his eyes piercing through the smoke and flames as if they were made of mere mist. He saw beyond the chaos, his vision revealing the layout behind the fiery veil. The solid barriers of the building, its walls, ceilings, and even the engulfing flames, started to blur and shimmer, gradually becoming translucent under his concentrated stare. The chaos inside the building was laid bare before him. In the dining area, a resident lay trapped under debris, unconscious, surrounded by an almost ethereal glow that highlighted his plight. Elsewhere, on the second floor, Clark's attention was drawn to a room where a wheelchair-bound woman was trapped. Her spouse's frantic efforts to clear a path were desperate, their panic resonating with Clark's heightened senses. The nearby elevator, its purpose rendered moot, stood silently stopped at the first floor amidst the turmoil. Another part of the building revealed the activities director, embodying a semblance of order amidst the disarray, attempting to lead a group of residents to safety. But their escape route was ominously blocked by an advancing inferno, the smoke weaving around them, creating a suffocating trap. The group's collective fear was almost tangible to Clark, each individual's anxiety piercing through the chaos. Sensing the rising panic in his son, Pa reached out, gripping Clark's shoulder firmly. His voice was a bastion of confidence amidst the chaos. "One at a time, son. Tell me someone we can help first." Clark's eyes, still seeing beyond the ordinary, focused intently. "Over there, in the dining room. There's a man. He's trapped but unconscious. I can see him breathing." Without hesitation, Pa began moving in the direction Clark pointed, his resolve unwavering. "Son, Inside there, stay aware of our surroundings. Things might change quickly and you need to keep our escape options open at all times. They approached a side door, with Clark leading the way. The door gave way to a hallway, somewhat removed from the core of the inferno. Here, the smoke was less dense, snaking along the ceiling in sinuous billows. Jogging alongside his father, Clark directed, "This way." Together, they navigated the labyrinthine interior of the retirement home, moving purposefully towards the front. As they advanced, the smoke grew thicker, a suffocating blanket that made every breath a challenge. Soon, the flames came into view, a voracious entity licking at the walls and rolling across the ceiling in waves of searing heat. At the end of the smoke-filled hallway, Clark and Pa reached a crucial juncture. "Through here," Clark said, his hand reaching for the knob of a closed door, his other senses already extending beyond its barrier. Just as Clark's grip turned the doorknob, Pa's voice cut through the tension. "Wait!" he called out sharply. In that split second, an immense backdraft ignited. The door, barely ajar, became the epicenter of an explosive force, a violent rush of air and flames bursting forth with incredible might. Reacting on his instincts, Pa had already thrown himself into the adjacent room, an open doorway offering the only refuge. He tucked himself behind the solid walls, narrowly escaping the blast. Clark, momentarily caught in the maelstrom, felt the scorching heat and the force of the flames tear past him, a visceral reminder of the fire's destructive power. He was momentarily stunned, the realization dawning on him only after the fact. Relief washed over him as he understood that his father's quick thinking had saved him from the worst of the backdraft. Once the initial fury of the backdraft subsided and the pressures within the room equalized, Pa cautiously crawled back out into the hallway. His movements were careful, his awareness heightened by the close call. The door, now hanging askew on its hinges, revealed the room beyond. It was an inferno, every inch consumed by ravenous flames. The dining area, once a place of communal joy and laughter, had transformed into a realm of fire. The heat emanating from it rippled through the air, distorting the view and making the space unrecognizable. "Where is he?" Pa shouted, his voice barely audible above the roar of the fire. "There," Clark pointed urgently towards a corner of the room, where the ceiling had partially collapsed. They hurried through the dining area, navigating a landscape that was disintegrating around them. The heat was so intense it caused parts of the building to peel and warp. Pieces of the ceiling fell sporadically, a dangerous rain of debris. The smoke was thick, a dense cloud that choked and blinded. Pa stayed low, moving with a cautious urgency. Clark noticed Pa's grimace of discomfort and saw him coughing violently in the smoke. They reached the side of the room where an elderly man lay unconscious under a pile of debris and a large flaming wooden beam from the ceiling. Clark paused, his mind racing. He had learned from the backdraft incident. He knew he had to assess the situation carefully. The beam was intertwined with a tangle of other flaming debris and ceiling beams. It was a precarious structure. A careless move could bring everything down. "We have to prop it up," Clark called over the noise of the fire, his voice steady despite the chaos. Pa, squinting against the smoke, pointed to a long, sturdy stainless steel serving table on the other side of the room. Clark immediately grasped his father's intention. "I'll wedge it in here to support the debris. Then I can lift." "You pull him out," Clark said, his plan forming rapidly in his mind. He moved with a speed and agility that belied the treacherous environment. Reaching the table, he lifted it effortlessly, despite its size and weight. He brought it back across the room and wedged it skillfully under the primary beam, creating a temporary support that held the weight of the collapsing ceiling. Pa, with his hands firmly gripping the man's arms, was poised and ready. He understood the plan and the narrow window of opportunity they had. The door they had entered was directly across the room, 50 feet away. A daunting distance in such perilous conditions, but their only path to safety. Clark locked eyes with Pa, an unspoken understanding passing between them. With a firm nod, Clark braced himself and lifted the massive flaming beam, his muscles straining under the weight, but his resolve unwavering. Pa, seizing the opportunity, pulled at the elderly man with all his might, sliding him out from under the debris. The man was still unconscious, oblivious to the peril around him. As Clark began to carefully lower the beam back into place, Pa tried to drag the elderly man to safety. But then, Clark's keen eyes caught a critical change. The pile of debris, now unstable, started to crumble in a Fleming cascade. Without a second's hesitation, Clark acted. In a swift, fluid movement, Clark bent down, scooping the man up with one arm and lifting Pa with the other. His legs pushed off the tile floor with superhuman force, propelling them across the room. Behind them, the ceiling gave way, the second floor crashing down in a fiery deluge where they had stood just moments before. Clark burst through the double doors, setting Pa down gently on the other side, while still cradling the unconscious man. Without pausing, they rushed down the hallway, the light from the fire casting eerie shadows as they moved. They emerged from the door they had entered, into the relative safety of the outside. A firefighter, catching sight of them, his eyes widened in disbelief. "How in the world did you—" he started to exclaim, but his words trailed off as he took in the scene before him. Clark and Pa, with the rescued man between them, set him down carefully at the firefighter's feet. The firefighter opened his mouth, about to ask a question, but Pa turned to Clark, cutting him off with a look that spoke volumes. In that glance there was pride, fear, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the extraordinary feat they had just accomplished. "Where next?" Pa's voice was serious. Clark's gaze swept back to the building, his extraordinary vision cutting through the smoke and flames once more. "There's a couple up there," he pointed towards the second floor. "And over there, a group of people cornered. They're barricaded in." Pa nodded decisively. "You go for the couple, I'll get the group free." Clark opened his mouth, a hint of worry for his father's safety flickering in his eyes, but he saw the determination etched on Pa's face. It was clear Pa was resolved to go back into the inferno, despite the risks. They jogged back towards the entrance, their steps heavy but determined. The firefighter, seeing them head back towards the danger, shouted in alarm, "You can't go in there!" But the urgency of their mission left no room for hesitation, and Pa and Clark moved on, disregarding the caution. "Which way?" Pa asked, not breaking stride, his focus laser-sharp. "Down the hall to the right, the door's blocked. It's their only way out." "Okay, go." Pa's command was brief, but it carried the weight of their shared resolve. Without another word, they split up, running off in different directions. Pa towards the group, and Clark towards the second floor. Each step they took in opposite directions was a race against time, a battle against the relentless fury of the fire. The building groaned and creaked around them, a symphony of destruction that underscored the peril of their task. As he ascended the stairs, Clark's hearing shifted, fine-tuning to the sounds of Pa's progress. It was like tuning into a specific radio frequency, each sound becoming clear and distinct amidst the chaos. He could discern his father's grunts of effort, the subtle shifts of debris, and even the ominous creaking of the burning structure. This auditory tapestry created a clear mental image for Clark, tracking his father's determined efforts through the chaos of the fire. Clark rounded the corner and moved down the smoke-filled hallway. To him, the dark black smoke was like a curtain drawn back, revealing the scene at the end of the hall. There, a man was hunched over his wife's wheelchair, his breaths ragged with the effort of gasping through the smoke. The woman was unconscious, slumped in the chair. Glancing back through the burning walls to where his father was, Clark saw Pa working fearlessly, using the pole of a lamp to clear a path. It was a scene of quiet heroism, a father doing everything in his power to save lives. The man by the elevator, unaware of Clark's presence, called out weakly. Clark responded with a voice full of assurance, "I'm going to get you out of here." The situation was critical. The flames were inching closer, and the floor beneath them gave an ominous lurch. The man was on the brink of suffocation. In that moment, Clark faced a dilemma. He needed to evacuate both the man and his wife immediately, but the challenge of carrying them both at the same time was daunting. His mind raced for a solution, his superhuman abilities poised to be tested in a way they never had before. Time was running out, and Clark knew he had to act fast to save the couple. In the split second of decision-making, Clark realized that rolling out the wheelchair was not a viable option. The building was on the brink of collapse, the floor beneath them groaning ominously, and the walls radiating heat like a blast furnace. Time was a luxury they no longer had. With quick thinking, Clark's eyes fell on the elevator. His vision, piercing through the chaos, revealed the shaft's sturdy concrete structure. Without hesitation, he moved towards the elevator doors. Placing his hands against the metal, he exerted his strength, ripping the doors apart with a resounding clatter. Below them, he saw the elevator car, stopped at the main level, its roof level with their current floor. He acted swiftly. Throwing the man's arm over his shoulder and gripping the handles of the wheelchair, Clark ushered the trio towards the shaft. As the floor began to give way, he lifted both the man and his wife, the wheelchair barely clearing the ground as they stepped onto the top of the elevator car. The second level of the building imploded behind them, a cascade of debris and flames filling the space they had just vacated. Now in the dark elevator shaft, they were momentarily safe from the collapsing building. The danger from the fire was momentarily abated, but they were far from secure. The second floor was gone, leaving no path back the way they came, and the way down was blocked by the wreckage of the collapsed level. Clark looked up, searching for an escape route. High above, at the top of the elevator shaft, he spotted a large hinged smoke vent, a door in the ceiling of the shaft. It was their only way out. The vent, typically used to release smoke in case of a fire, now offered a glimmer of hope, a potential path to safety. Clark's arms were securely wrapped around the man and his unconscious wife, one cradled in each of his powerful arms. He gazed upwards, a moment of disbelief at the audacity of what he was about to attempt crossing his features. He took a deep, steadying breath, preparing himself. Then, with the gentlest push from his feet, Clark began to ascend through the elevator shaft. The motion was smooth, almost serene, as he defied gravity and rose upwards. The man, startled and confused, let out a protest. He couldn't comprehend what was happening, the reality of their flight contradicting everything he knew about the world. Clark accelerated, his back and shoulders colliding with the vent door at the top of the shaft. He was cautious, mindful of not injuring his precious cargo. With a controlled burst of strength, he pushed through, emerging into the smoke-filled night sky above the burning building. "How are you doing this?" the man began, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Clark landed gently, setting the couple down on the lawn with care. "Stay right here, sir. I'm going to find someone to come help you and your wife," he said quickly, cutting off the man's questions. "But you just," the man stuttered, still in shock, his words trailing off as Clark dashed away. As Clark rounded a corner of the building, an EMS responder caught sight of him and immediately began heading in their direction. Clark pointed towards the couple he had just rescued, ensuring they would receive the necessary care. As the EMS worker rushed to attend to the couple, Clark's gaze shifted back to the building, to his father still inside. Anxiety knitted his brow. Even with his abilities, the fear for his father's safety was a gnawing presence in his mind. He knew he had to return to the inferno, to the chaos and danger, to ensure that his father, and any others still trapped, made it out safely. As Pa navigated the treacherous interior of the retirement home, leading the group through the thick, suffocating smoke, Clark re-entered the building. It was then he perceived the ominous creaking and groaning of the building's structure, a foreboding sound that spelled imminent danger. In that split second, Clark's heightened senses detected the building's failing integrity. The ceiling above his father and the group he was leading began to give way. Time seemed to warp around Clark, elongating and stretching as his reflexes kicked into overdrive. The world around him slowed to an almost surreal pace. Flickering flames appeared to freeze mid-dance, debris hung motionless in the air, and the smoke's chaotic swirls became eerily still. Ashes and embers were like a tableau, suspended in a moment of time. In this frozen world, Clark acted. He abandoned caution, his body leaning forward as he propelled himself with a speed he had never before attained. He became a mere blur, a force of nature in human form. He charged through walls, flames, and floating debris with incredible force, focused solely on reaching his father. As he burst through the final barrier, he saw Pa's face, etched with terror, calling out Clark's name in a moment of despair. But before the fear could fully register, Clark was there, a guardian amidst the chaos. With a Herculean effort, Clark thrust his hands above his head, catching the massive ceiling as it crashed down. His feet were planted wide apart, his entire body tensed and strained under the colossal weight of the second floor. Beneath him, Pa and the group looked on in disbelief. "Go!" Clark bellowed, his voice laced with both urgency and reassurance. "I've got this, but I don't know how long it will hold." His muscles were taut, every fiber straining to maintain the delicate balance of the unstable structure above him. Pa, realizing the gravity of the situation, ushered the group forward, guiding them towards safety. They moved quickly, spurred on by Clark's incredible feat. Clark, standing as the last bastion against the building's total collapse, held firm. Pa, with a mix of urgency and relief, guided the last of the residents out of the perilous hallway, away from the imminent collapse. As he made his own hasty exit, his eyes met Clark's. In that moment, there was a profound shift in Pa's gaze. It was filled with wonder and amazement, a father seeing his son in a light he had never seen before. Pa had always known about Clark's abilities, but witnessing them in such a dramatic, life-saving display was entirely different. Clark, steadfast and resolute, held the building aloft just long enough to ensure the safety of every last person in the group. Then, with a final glance to confirm their escape, he let the structure go. The building came crashing down in a maelstrom of flames and debris, engulfing Clark in a fiery cascade. As the dust and ash settled, Clark quickly assessed the situation. His clothes were ablaze, the fabric singed and disintegrating into charred wisps. He was a figure wreathed in fire, yet unharmed by the flames. With a sense of urgency and a dash of embarrassment, he moved away from the scene in a blur, heading straight for the pickup where Ma was waiting. Ma gasped as Clark appeared beside her in a whirl of motion, his scorched attire barely clinging to him. She immediately noticed the state of his clothes, burned away by the fire. "Into the truck!" she urged him, her voice tinged with panic. She glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes wide with shock and concern. "We got them out, Ma. We got them all out," Clark reassured her, his voice steady despite the tumultuous events. A smile flickered on Ma's face, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "I'm going to find your father. We need to get out of here before anyone starts asking questions," she said, her mind already racing with the implications of what had just happened. Six. Present day. Clark made his way to the Regency Hotel for the press conference, located just 2 blocks from the epicenter of the crisis at Star Labs. The atmosphere outside was electric, charged with a sense of urgency that was almost tangible. Media vans and satellite trucks lined the street, forming a makeshift broadcast hub. Reporters and camera crews bustled about, their movements brisk and purposeful. Navigating through the crowd with practiced ease, Clark's press badge was prominently displayed, a passport granting him entry into the heart of the event. Security was tight, a necessary precaution given the sensitive nature of the briefing. Officials checked credentials meticulously, ensuring only authorized personnel gained access. The press conference was set up in the hotel's grandeur conference room, a space known for hosting high-profile events. Inside, the room was a hive of activity. Large news outlets had already staked out prime spots, their cameras and microphones poised like sentinels ready for action. Clark found a space towards the side, away from the major networks. It wasn't the best spot in the room, but it offered a clear view of the podium, which was all he needed. He set up quickly, efficiency being key in situations like these. His laptop came out first, followed by a notepad and a small digital recorder. Each item was checked with a swift but thorough scrutiny. A brief glance at his phone confirmed it was charged, ready for live updates and social media posts. The room buzzed with the low hum of conversations. Some speculated about the cause of the explosion, their theories ranging from the plausible to the far-fetched. Others discussed the potential implications of the incident, their voices a blend of concern and professional curiosity. Clark's ears tuned into snippets of conversation about the lab's safety record and rumors of controversial experiments. He jotted these down in his notepad, mental gears already turning. Each piece of overheard dialogue was a potential lead, a thread that could unravel a larger story. In the world of reporting, sometimes the most significant clues came from the most innocuous of sources. The room fell silent as the lead incident coordinator made his way to the podium. The previous buzz of conversations and speculations ceased abruptly, every eye in the room focusing on the figure who now embodied the authority on the crisis. Camera flashes flickered sporadically, casting brief illuminations across the room, while the air was filled with the soft, persistent hum of recording devices, each ready to capture every word spoken. The coordinator stood at the podium, his expression solemn, an appropriate reflection of the gravity of the situation. The weight of the moment seemed to settle on his shoulders as he prepared to address the room full of expectant journalists. His gaze swept over the audience, making fleeting eye contact with various reporters, including Clark, before he began to speak. "Good morning. My name is Samuel Koza, and I am the lead incident coordinator. At 9:23 this morning, approximately 2 hours ago, we faced an immense explosion in the reactor room at Star Labs' state-of-the-art fusion reactor facility," he started, his voice steady but laced with the gravity of the situation. The room fell into a hushed silence, hanging on his every word. Eyewitness accounts and initial investigations point towards a failure in the containment field generator system, leading to a catastrophic chain reaction of incredible force, he continued. His expression remained unreadable. "As of now, it is too early to estimate the exact number of casualties," he said, pausing briefly as a somber mood enveloped the room. "First responders and emergency personnel are on the ground, working tirelessly to provide aid. However, we must acknowledge the grim reality. There are at least between 20 and 30 people currently unaccounted for." He shifted slightly, clasping his hands before him. "The structural integrity of the eastern wing of the Star Labs facility has been highly compromised. We've already witnessed catastrophic structural damage." A murmur rippled through the crowd as he delved into the complexities of the rescue efforts. "Complicating our rescue operations is the fact that the fusion reactor core remains active. Without a fully operational containment field generator, the reactor, essentially a miniature sun, cannot be cooled. The core will continue to heat, creating extremely challenging conditions for our emergency rescue teams." The coordinator's gaze swept across the room. "Emergency personnel are collaborating with structural engineers to devise strategies for securing the dangerous rubble. This is vital for aiding the rescue of those unaccounted for." He paused, his demeanor reflecting the seriousness of the situation. "This is a developing scenario, and many details are still forthcoming. We appreciate your patience and understanding as we navigate this crisis." The room buzzed with a tense energy as he concluded. "Let's proceed with questions." Reporters hastily prepared their notes, their pens poised for a barrage of inquiries. The coordinator's eyes scanned the room, selecting the first reporter, who stood up briskly. "Can you provide more details about the failure in the containment field generator system? Was it a mechanical failure or human error?" the reporter asked, voice clear and insistent. The coordinator nodded gravely. "As of now, the exact cause of the failure is under thorough investigation. We are looking into all possibilities, including mechanical failure and human error. However, it's imperative that we base our conclusions on evidence, and as such, we cannot provide a definitive answer at this moment," he replied, his tone reflecting the complexity of the situation. Another reporter, a woman with a notepad, quickly followed up. "What measures are being taken to ensure the safety of the first responders, especially with the fusion reactor core still active?" The coordinator gestured slightly with his hand, emphasizing his point. "The safety of our first responders is our utmost priority. We've deployed remote-operated drones to assess the reactor's condition, and are utilizing protective gear designed for these kinds of environments. Additionally, we've established a safety perimeter and are continuously monitoring the structural integrity of the building." A hush fell over the room as a third reporter stood, his question laced with urgency. "Are there any plans for evacuating the surrounding areas due to the compromised structural integrity of the facility and the active reactor core?" The coordinator's expression turned solemn. "We are closely monitoring the situation and working with local authorities to assess the need for evacuation. As of now, no mandatory evacuation has been ordered. However, we advise residents in the vicinity to stay alert and follow any future directives from emergency services. Let me assure you, public safety is of primary concern, and we will not hesitate to take necessary actions should the need arise." His answers, measured and deliberate, offered some clarity but also underscored the grave uncertainty of the situation. The reporters scribbled down notes feverishly, their minds racing with the implications of his words. The coordinator's gaze turned to Clark, with a nod in his direction. Clark spoke up. According to information received from reliable sources, there is a group of 20 students trapped in a precarious void near the reactor atrium. Could you elaborate on the precise rescue strategies being formulated to ensure their safe evacuation? The coordinator hesitated momentarily. The information about specific individuals in the vicinity of the reactor atrium is part of a sensitive ongoing operation, he continued, regaining his composure. But I can tell you that our response team is actively discussing several strategic options. We are committed to ensuring the safety of everyone involved, and all potential rescue operations are being meticulously planned with utmost care. A wave of reactions rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled notes frantically or whispered to their colleagues. In the front row, next to the podium, a hardened brunette reporter turned her head, her eyes briefly meeting Clark's. He recognized her instantly, Lois Lane of the Daily Planet. They had never crossed paths, yet her reputation preceded her. She was widely regarded as one of the most distinguished journalists in Metropolis. In this moment, her expression was a complex tapestry of focus, concern, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Her journalistic instincts clearly piqued by the new revelations. Over the murmured reactions in the room, Clark continued. A quick follow-up question, sir. I have credible sources who attest to a severe compromise in the building's structural integrity, with an imminent risk of collapse. Can you comment on the confidence level of your emergency teams in reaching the trapped students before such an eventuality? The coordinator briefly furrowed his brow, then responded, I'm not certain about the sources you're referring to. But what I can say is that our rescue teams are highly skilled professionals, well-equipped, and prepared to conduct these operations under even the most difficult conditions. Let's move on to the next question. In the front row, Lois Lane's voice rang louder than the rest. In light of the reactor core's increasing instability and heat, could you elaborate on how this complicates the rescue efforts for the trapped students? What additional challenges does this pose for the emergency teams working in proximity to the reactor? With a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone, the coordinator addressed the concern. Let me be clear. The situation with the reactor core is indeed complex, but implying that we are not considering all variables is not accurate. The reality is, accessing the slab from above is not just risky, it's practically inviting a larger catastrophe, either to the reactor's stability or the slab's integrity. So, yes, our efforts are intensely focused on finding a path from the lower levels of the building. It's not just the best option, it's the only viable one we have at the moment. Our teams are fully committed and are sparing no effort to ensure a safe rescue operation. Lois Lane opened her mouth to respond, but the lead incident coordinator interjected swiftly. That's all the time we have for questions now. His voice was final, leaving no room for further inquiry. The room erupted with a chorus of protests, calls for just one more question, ricocheting off the walls, but it was to no avail. The coordinator, flanked by his support staff, strode out of the room with a brisk, determined pace, effectively bringing the press conference to an abrupt end. Clark lingered for a moment, his mind turning over the information he'd gathered. The evasive answers and lack of concrete details spoke volumes. It was clear to him that the authorities were scrambling, lacking a definitive plan to reach the trapped students. This realization weighed heavily on him, his thoughts already racing to what this meant for his next steps. As he turned to head towards the nearest exit, Clark noticed Lois watching him from across the room. She was studying him, her eyes sharp, analytical, the hallmark of a seasoned reporter piecing together a puzzle. Clark, aware of her scrutiny, couldn't help but grin to himself as he stepped out the door.